But before we start, this is being live streamed, so I'm not able to do exactly what I want to do, but I'm hoping to create much more of a conversation with all of you. I'd like to start, however, with welcoming everyone to the True Value of Food conversation. I think one of the most important conversations we can be having as members of the food system. My name is Roy Steiner. I am Senior Vice President of the Rockefeller Foundation, and I lead the Food Initiative. And it is my honor to be here today with a really great group of panelists, and I can see the quality of the audience is extraordinary. I see some really amazing people. So I think, you know, we may be few, but we are top quality. So that's what matters. Well, let me just start with saying a couple of very quick remarks. Our two keynote speakers will be on video, and then we will bring the panelists up, have some remarks, but then we're going to do a little bit of flexible community discussion, okay, which is not going to be the usual AGRF where we just sit and we talk back and forth, but create more of an environment where we can do some consultation, because I'm going to take advantage of having this, being the moderator for this session. So let me just begin with saying I really do believe that the concept of true value of food is going to be one of the most important concepts as we rethink the transformation of the food system. This idea of really looking at all the benefits and costs has been around for 40, 50 years. But it's really only been recently that we've developed the methodologies to really understand it. And the true value of food, and many people have started developing and doing the analysis in this area. But we really became engaged when we partnered with McKinsey & Company in the United States to do an analysis of all the value that the food system creates and all the costs associated with it. And one of the challenging things of that is in the US, in the United States, we create about $1 trillion worth of value, economic value, but at the same time, the food system creates at least, if not more, $2 trillion worth of costs. And these are healthcare costs, economic costs, biodiversity, economic opportunity. So in fact, what we've created, and no one wants this, is we created a value-destroying food system. And that's true for the United States. That is true for the globe. And we're finding that is actually true for most countries in the world. And that should disturb all of us. You know, all of us in the food system, we want to be creating value. We don't want to be destroying value. But in order for us to really understand that, we need to understand how the food system operates and what are the unintended indirect costs, and how do we change that? Because we can enable the food system to become a value-creating system that actually improves human health, improves the environment, and creates the economic opportunities that we need. So without further ado, let's go to the videos, and then I'll call the panelists up on stage, and then we'll take it from there. So if the Assistant Director General of the ILO, the International Labor Organization. So we'll have those two videos, and then we'll have this very interesting, intimate panel discussion and audience discussion. So please go ahead, Sergio, and let's see the video.
Hello, Excellencies, Minister, and other delegates attending the AGRF. Thank you so much for inviting me to today. I really wish I could be there with you in person. I'm Diane Hogarth, Executive Vice President of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. WBCSD is a global CEO-led community of more than 200 of the world's leading sustainable businesses. We bring leading companies together to collectively accelerate the system transformations needed for a net zero, nature positive, and more equitable future. And we are committed to a regenerative and equitable agricultural system, which is capable of producing healthy, safe, and nutritious food for all. But the way we grow and consume our food plays a really big role in how we're able to deliver together on this vision. Currently, the global food system is one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions and one of the largest drivers of biodiversity loss. But at the same time, our food systems are struggling with inequality, hunger, and the health crises of both over and undernutrition. All of this is resulting in US dollars per year. Today, with the soaring prices of food and energy costs because of the pandemic, but really accelerated due to the war in Ukraine, we need more action than ever to ensure affordable, accessible, sustainable, and nutritious food for all. To do this, we have to change how we value food. And I don't mean how we value food at the store shelf, but how capital markets and governments assess value and how we recognize value in communities as well. There were several pathways identified by the 2021 UN Food Systems Summit that help us pursue this vision. Each one of them starts from the awareness that the true social, human, and natural capital costs are not fully accounted for in the production and the consumption of food. To change this, we need a few things. First, we need policy frameworks that allow governments to measure the impact of policy choices and to reward or compensate those who are willing to actively invest. Second, we need businesses to make better internal decisions and to come up with revenue models that share value across supply chains. There are examples of these, and I'll get into some of these a bit later, but it includes things like carbon farming, reducing food losses and food waste. And then third, we need consumers to be able to make more informed choices when buying food. This occurs when we can better enable transparency on what happens across agricultural value chains. We can support these three objectives by leveraging the existing landscape of frameworks that build on true cost and value accounting for food. But at the same time, we need to really push and converge towards an internationally accepted, harmonized framework on true value accounting. From the investor perspective, the risks and dependencies that businesses across the food system have on natural and human capital has to be better understood. And these risks and dependencies have to be incorporated into how these companies are rewarded and how risk in their operating profiles is recognized across food and beverage companies in the global value chain landscape. Providers of finance are already starting to look more into the sustainability performance of food producers instead of focusing on financial health only. Companies who are disclosing risks and taking actions to address these externalities in some cases are, but increasingly must be better rewarded by the capital markets to optimize the allocation of capital from a financial as well as environmental and societal perspectives. We are seeing companies starting to take action on these today. I'm going to share just a few examples with you. DSM, for example, is quantifying environmental and social costs and benefits in one of their products already, a product called Oatwall. Olam accounts for impacts and dependencies of key non-financial capitals. They're actually applying monetary value in their Olam integrated impact assessment. This helps that as a business gain insights as well on key risks as well as on key opportunities, allowing them to move faster across their business enterprise. In a third example, Danone has created a methodology to fund development projects through carbon credits. This allows them to look into new business models and be able to work directly with project developers all the way back to farm to deliver strong social and economic benefits and impacts. Another example, Rabobank is implementing various true value of food propositions and is one of the strongest partners in the true value of food work. For instance, Rabobank's Carbon Bank is currently developing propositions and launching pilots in carbon farming, which provide new revenue streams to farmers and to farm agricultural communities through nature-based voluntary carbon credits. These are all great examples, but to be able to really scale them, we need the right policy environment. And we need stakeholders across sectors to come together to support this vision on how we can account for the true value of food. As regulatory frameworks play a crucial role in this space, we must together integrate the true value of food principles into collective public-private action. We've got great opportunities coming up yet this year with COP27 and into next year with many big events, even through to the G20, as these leading countries come together to consider these impacts and opportunity spaces. The Multi-Stakeholder True Value of Food Initiative, which was launched at the 2021 UN Food Systems Summit, which is co-led by WBCSD together with really great partners, including UNEP, FAO, Rabobank, and others, is going to kickstart a consultation on the global true value of food principles at COP27. This will enable us to start harmonizing the interventions required to transform our food systems for people, communities, and our planet. And we're really excited to bring the work, the discussion that will come out of your time together at the AGRF into that discussion at COP27. So we call on all of you to be part of this exciting journey and to join us, because the real front runners coming from Africa and the continent, the leadership that you have, can really show the rest of the world what we can do with this together. Thank you so much.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. COVID has had a profound impact on the world of work. It has exposed and exacerbated the structural challenges and decent work deficits across and within countries and regions. The massive loss of working hours and incomes has pushed many workers into poverty. Today, an additional 38 million adults live in extreme poverty. A significant number of them are in Africa. Years of progress in our fight against poverty have been lost, while recovery efforts are undermined by the new multiple crises that have been unfolding globally. These crises have highlighted the importance of building resilient systems across all sectors. This is more so in our food systems, which are essential to all of us. Agriculture makes up half of the employment in Africa, and women workers account for half of the workforce. However, around the globe, agricultural workers face significant decent work deficits. In many countries, agricultural workers remain excluded from legal protections such as minimum wages, paid sick leave, and freedom to organize. There's widespread informality, insecure forms of work, and a lack of social protection. It's noteworthy that 98% of employment in agriculture is informal in Africa. The sector also accounts for the largest share of child labor worldwide. In sub-Saharan Africa, 4 out of every 5 children engaged in child labor are in agriculture. Women, youth, and migrant workers are disproportionately affected by decent work deficits in this sector. All this show that the pandemic has helped to alleviate the frailty of our food systems. It is made clear that building a resilient and sustainable food system requires an approach that addresses decent work deficits while promoting equitable livelihoods for all food system workers. ILO, with its mandate covering the world of work and the unique tripartite structure that gives an equal voice to workers, employment, and governance has a wide range of tools that are tested, as well as methods to effectively advance such approaches. The implementation of ILO conventions, both the fundamental ones and those who are specific to agriculture, needs to be a priority and includes strengthening labor laws, labor administration, and labor inspection. Improving the quality of work in the sector will require a focus on working conditions, including occupational safety, promoting decent incomes and wages, strengthening social protection and social dialogue, as well as improving productivity and skills. Creating an enabling environment for sustainable enterprise development and enabling small-scale producers to move higher up in the supply chain is equally important to advance equitable livelihoods in the sector. In a continent whose youth creates but also awaits opportunities, improving the quality of jobs will be instrumental in unlocking food systems' potentials as a source of livelihood opportunities for the youth. A just transition towards environmentally sustainable food systems will also be critical. It will require a gender transformative approach, as many environmental challenges and opportunities have a strong gender dimension. With a clear goal of sustainable and human-centered transformation of food systems, with decent work at its core, we must work together to achieve policy coherence through multi-stakeholder involvement. These efforts need to build on the existing continental and global frameworks, such as the 2030 Agenda, the African Union Agenda 2063, and the ILO Abidjan Declaration of 2019. I believe that together we will make a difference. And this will be based on our strengthened joint commitment to make decent work a reality for those working in the food system. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wonderful. Let's now go into the real dialogue and consultation process. And I'd like to do this, start by welcoming the panelists to the stage. But at the same time, I'd like to actually have everybody just make a big circle so that we actually create this sense of a conversation. I would have preferred to have everybody in a big circle, but I'm told I can't take the panelists off the stage because this is being live streamed. So, but there'll be cameras around. So without further ado, let me invite our panelists as well as our distinguished government ministers who will also be joining us. The way this is going to work, we'll have short presentations by our panelists. Then we'll have this consultation, and then I think we'll end with closing comments from the Honorable Ministry of the Environment of Rwanda, as well as the Honorable Minister of Livestock, Fisheries and Food from the Gabon, former minister. So let me introduce to you Dr. Lawrence Haddad, Executive Director of GAIN. He'll be joining us. Professor Cheryl Hendricks will be joining us virtually. Mr. Francois Nzingi Jumba, who is the Managing Director and CEO of Kalimo General Business, will be joining us. Mr. Omid Kassiri, Managing Partner of the East Africa McKinsey Office. And let's see, I don't think Suzanne is here. Is that correct, Sergio? Oh, Suzanne will be virtual as well, and Tabby hasn't arrived, right? Okay, perfect. I think that is it. And then I'd like to also welcome Mr. Biendi Maganga Musovu, who is former Minister of Agriculture, Livestock, Fisheries and Food, as well as the Honorable Mujawa Maria to come to the stage. As we're doing that, can you just, everybody come sit, move your chairs, and can I ask Yvonne and Payman to help create this kind of circular concept so that we are actually creating a more conducive environment to consultation. Oh, I think further than that they are really wonderful. Thank you for participating in our community discussion. Let's start off with our virtual virtual members of the panel. And Cheryl, can I ask you to lead us off with your remarks, please?
Yes, good morning, Roy. Good morning, participants, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. Just check you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Great.
Okay, great. So as the presenters have already presented this morning, the external costs in the food system, or what we refer to as the hidden costs, are not helping in terms of us valuing the real value of food in the food system. So what happens is that we're not capturing the benefits of healthy food, but markets also don't take into account how unhealthy and unsustainable food is taxing our system. Businesses also don't take into account these costs in managing profits, and the GDP contributions of food systems are not taken into account. So as a result, we have sustainable and healthy food that's very expensive, and unsustainable and unhealthy food that's too cheap. So of course, this influences decisions along the food chain and all the way through to consumers. So if we're really going to ensure a fairer, sustainable and healthy food system, we need to shift to a more systemic system of accountability. We clearly have to internalize the cost, and this doesn't mean only at the consumer end, but through multiple mechanisms. There also has to be a redistribution of responsibilities and costs across the food system. And for this, we need enabling comprehensive policies that go beyond measurement and metrics to incentivize everybody in the food system to make these choices. So it's very important in these discussions to realize that we're not talking about raising the price of food. We're talking about redistributing and internalizing these costs across the whole food system. So two examples from the Impact Institute, looking at coffee and also then in fair trade bananas, shows that producers can significantly reduce the cost of production through more sustainable agricultural practices and fairer wage systems. But in fair trade bananas, for example, this is not passed on to the consumer. So the consumer is paying an elevated cost for these products. So very much like Roy explained, the US estimation of costs, the global estimations done through the UN Food Systems Summit Science Group last year were very much similar. So that the costs to health and the environment of the $19 trillion food bill across the global system are likely to be double. A new assessment that we just wrapping up shows that these costs may actually be a bit higher if we take into account new estimations of some of the components that are included in the calculation. But clearly, we have to go way beyond just the true cost accounting and estimating what these values are. We have to shift to two very important levels. The first is systematizing these costs in the system, and secondly, creating policy options for governments to consider and backed up by evidence-based research that can determine what the trade-offs and the likely impacts are for different actors in the food system and for the food system as a whole, because any change and shift in the food system is going to lead to knock-on effects, sometimes unintended consequences that may be unaffordability elements, but we need to look very carefully at these. So true cost accounting forms the base, but then we need to look at some of the ways in which we can systematize these elements. So this could be, for example, driving reductions in emissions. So this could be naming and shaming, transparency issues, accounting for biodiversity loss, increased pollution, for example. We also need to look at the food loss and waste, because this is a no-brainer in terms of what we can do to reduce the costs. We can also monitor the impact of climate change, health shifts, dietary shifts, and look at both action and the cost of inaction on these. We, of course, can drive significant change through business portfolio management, through economic and social governance risks components, and also communicating about fairness, health, and sustainability practices. So, for example, something like eco-labeling, but going beyond just eco-labeling to include the three components that are affected. So there are also many ways of introducing the conditionalities for loans, investments, and development practices. On the policy options side, there are a wide range of possible mechanisms, but a great deal more research needs to go into looking at what these policies could do to the food system. So they could be, for example, regulation, taxes, subsidies, or income policies. Great deal more coordination happens, and we haven't really come to grips with the governance structure required for food systems, let alone governance for managing the true cost elements in the system. Shaping consumer preferences for healthy diets, of course, would play an enormous role. And this could be done even from the entry level of school meals, for example. So what we condition people as a healthy meal is very important. Changing procurement behavior to stop people from undercutting prices that have negative environmental, health, and social outcomes are possible. And one of the other important considerations that we need to look at is the adjustment of poverty lines, social security floors, and also perhaps recalculating consumer index baskets to facilitate making sure that these are healthy, and looking at the affordability of the components. So the knowledge that's being developed in order to estimate these, to come up with policy ideas, and testing how we do these shifts is rapidly expanding. And so we need to keep this in mind going forward, that costing this food system is not a static exercise, but that we have to constantly update with new data, with new insight, for example, COVID's impact on non-communicable diseases, and what that's going to do for the health system. I'll leave it there for now, Roy.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And yeah, there's clearly a lot of levers we can use to actually create value rather than destroy value. So, and I love that last point about this is really about learning, because as a community, as a global community, we need to be constantly changing. On that note, let me just go over to Omid, if you could share a few ideas in a few minutes, and then we'll go back to Suzanne.
Sure. Works.
Yeah, you may have to go. Yeah, talk
Okay.
directly, and I can hear you.
So maybe before some ideas, a backstory. I lead McKinsey's agriculture practice. I'm a farmer, and when Paymon at Rockefeller approached us to support Rockefeller on calculating this total cost of food, I was highly skeptical. I've read many reports. These were big words. I kept seeing these words externalities, and I thought, what difference is this really going to make? There was ideas of writing white papers that go to the AU, and I sort of was skeptical. There are not many people more persistent than I am. Payman is one of them. I couldn't be, Roy, what they say is there's very few perfect heads. The rest God covered with hair. So that is a perfect head over there. So I couldn't be more grateful, because the numbers told an unbelievably fascinating story. And so I'm just going to throw a few numbers at you and see if it has a similar effect. So 1 bushel of wheat, which is about this big, typically produces 42 loaves of white bread. That same bushel of wheat produces 60 loaves of whole bran bread. The same bushel. Okay? So a lot more food from the same bushel, depending on whether you refine it or not. There are 70 million school-going children across the continent and growing who are potential recipients of school feeding programs. There are approximately 25% of children on this continent who are physically and or mentally stunted. So we can throw all the development dollars we want at capability building, but if these children are physically or mentally stunted in their earliest years, what hope do they actually have? Okay? When you do not refine wheat, it is 5 times more nutritious. 5 times. Not a fraction, but 5 times. Because of this dynamic of 1 bushel being able to produce 60 loaves versus 42, potentially you can use 25% less land to feed the same number of children. Something very important in a country like Rwanda, where land is extremely scarce. And finally, and this is my McKinsey hat, is there is a positive IRR, a positive return on investment from doing this. It actually overall doesn't need to cost the private sector very much to achieve this outcome. So my question is why? Why not? It is absolutely crazy, if you ask me, based on these numbers, for us not to be going down this path. Now, some may say, well, preference. Rockefeller, in partnership with the government of Rwanda, did a pilot last year, if I'm not mistaken, for 18 schools, 14,000 children. At the end of this pilot, 70+% of the children were aware of the nutritional benefits of whole grains. 97% preferred the taste. And parents of the children started asking, where can we get this outside of the schools? So again, I say why? Why not?
Great, thank you. That is a good question. Why not? Thank you, Amit. Let me turn it over to Suzanne. Can you share who Rabobank, as you know, one of the great agricultural banks of the world. Please share some of your thoughts as well.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Dear Excellencies, dear participants, I'm so honored to be here, and unfortunately not in person, but I hope to see many of you either at COP27, UNGA, COP15, or with Davos coming up. So many opportunities ahead of us. And I must say that the remarks of Amit resounded very well, because this is also what we say when we are having these true value of food dialogues. You could state it's complex. Yes, it is, because we have a lot of figures to consider. But to do nothing is even more complex. And that brings me to a point that is sometimes left out in these discussions, and then I would love to loop in, which is the voice of the next generation. If we look at those hidden costs, we actually think it's not hidden. These costs are there, but they are just projected to the next generation, especially as calculated by the Food System Summit Scientific Committee, that will only be visible in the next generation. So it's really about time that we bring in the voice of the next generation to discuss this with us. Having said that, I do represent Rabobank. Thanks, Roy. We are indeed a global leading food and agri bank, and we are engaged in this discussion. Why as a bank? Diane Holdorf already referred to it. Because we think it's high time that we rediscuss the risk-reward duration. We do have to get to a true risk assessment. It's not only about financial performance, it's about sustainability performance as well. But we do want to facilitate our clients with a level playing field. We want to give them security. We want to give them clarity. How can they invest and how can we bridge that gap? Because this finance span right now is like 5 to 10 years. But if you as a farmer are investing, for instance, in regen ag or agroecology, it takes much more to see the first results. So our plea actually would be to have a global carbon tax. We know this is politically very difficult at this stage, but ultimately somehow these negative environmental impact costs should be addressed in a global harmonized way. And since this is not in place yet, we are actively involved in trying to get the metrics, so the calculations, the true cost accounting, together with our clients. But we also try to get to solutions like thinking about, for instance, shadow prices. Could we have like a fictitious price tag that we could experiment with some of our clients and see how these environmental and health costs could indeed be priced in, and what that could mean for the financial incentives they would need, but also for the rewards they could get. So what we did is launch a carbon bank last year, and this carbon bank is actively now helping small-scale farmers in Africa, providing them with new revenue models in which they can sequester carbon in fruit trees. This is just one example to see how we can get to this win-win-win situation in which you get greenhouse gas emission reduction, a better revenue model, and you have the biodiversity improvement. This is just one example. Another example in the Netherlands, as a bank, we are trying to facilitate the Green Farmers Coalition, and we advise them to look at true prices as well. Because with the nitrogen discussion that probably some of you have really followed in the recent news, we do have to come up with solutions that provide clarity and security to those farmers, but we think it has to be set in this true cost and true price context. Having said all of this, what is then the role of the governments? And Diane referred to the principles, we know also the courts. So there's a lot of movement, but how can you as a government step up? We think there's a few ways. First of all, we think it's very important to take this to the multilateral level as well and look in the trade aspect. Because if you are going to have new policy interventions addressing true value of food, you have to discuss the trade implications as well. You also have to enter into very sensitive political discussions, but necessary discussions around trade-offs. So who is going to decide whether an avocado is healthy indeed, but takes a lot of water in some countries? So what then exactly would be that true price? What would be the value that we as a society as a whole globally would see as the true value of an avocado? And I think in that respect, it would be very, very helpful if WTO, for instance, would also enter into these discussions, including at COP27. Having said that, I think it would be extremely beautiful if African countries, where we do see a huge climate change impact, but also a huge opportunity for nature-based solutions, be the front runners of this discussion. Show the policy interventions, show the interregional trade, because there are so many nice work streams already going on with IICA, the Latin American and North American countries engaged together with African countries to discuss this. So the fact that we have a true value food discussion at this AGRF conference right now already is very symbolic. And let's please proceed that discussion, but please champion. And if you do want to reach out to us as a UN Food System Summit initiative that Diane referred to as well, we would love to engage you in our COP27 True Value Food discussions. So I welcome you and thank you very much for your attention. Back to you, Roy.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I think there's a lot there, and so glad that a bank like Rabobank is thinking about these things. Let me turn over to Mr. Francois Nzingamumba, who is the managing director of Kalimo General Business. And from a local business perspective, how are you thinking about the true value of food?
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. I'm really happy to be here in this panel, in this GRF summit, discussing the true value of food. For me, it's somehow complex because it involves a lot of people, different segments, and different policies, from research up to the market, up to the consumption. If we talk about the true value of food, we think about from private sector perspective, we see production first. As business people, in production, we play a very big role by providing input. By input, I say fertilizer, seed, the right seed, high quality seeds. But also now we are being involved in extension to teach our partners, farmers, how to use on maximum the improved seeds and fertilizer, even the pesticide, to be able to produce and to maximize the yield. Otherwise, when the farmer doesn't maximize the yield, we'll find the business it doesn't make sense for him to produce. He will leave the crop, move to another one. But when he's maximizing the yield, he maximizes his revenues, and together as our partner, he undertakes the real business, and we partner very well on that side. So we are really close to farmers to help him, but not to help him as such. We help ourselves because the farmer is our client and our partner, because we sell seeds, fertilizer, chemicals, and even the extension services. After production, as private sector, we go there to aggregate the produce. Aggregation of produce needs basic infrastructure, and that we cannot provide it. That is why we need the government to support farmers by availing minimum infrastructure that will help farmers to keep good quality of production. Otherwise, they will lose quality and will have a lot of losses after harvesting. So I congratulate, for example, my government here in Rwanda. They have made a lot of investment to support farmers to access the right infrastructure to be able to deal properly with post-harvest activities. Here I say maize producers and the vegetable producers, they have been benefiting some cold room to keep their production. So as a private sector, we go there, we aggregate produce, we bring it to our stores, and we keep it in good way. We improve the quality again to be able to store it for some times after selling it as it is, or selling it to processors to be able to go to the market with a finished product. When I'm talking about that, when you aggregate, you need also roads to access the production area. We need appropriate transportation tool like trucks to be able to access to bring the production in good condition in your storage and or to the consumption place. So all those elements need investment. As private sector, we are facing two problems. The first one is financing. All money that we use from input up to the market is very, very expensive. And that affects the price, which is very, very important in this process. If you consider the money that you invest to get the right inputs, if you consider the money that you use to do proper logistics, and the money that you use and you pay to be able to keep the quality of food, it's a lot of money. And when it is expensive, it affects the price of market. And that is where we are facing a lot of challenges, and we need different stakeholders. We need partners, we need the government to work on this aspect. Without the right financing, we will not have the true value of food. We need really adapted, specific means of financing to be able to provide and to ensure in a consistent manner the right value of food on our table. Thank you very much.
Great. So I think that really understanding that value creation system is so critical. We're being joined by Tabby Joda, who is an expert on local communities, ecosystems, resilience. Thank you, Tabby, for joining us. Do you have a few comments on the true value of food? And and please, we have just a few minutes.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies and the earlier speakers. I second very well so much of the conversations because they resonate very well with what I do on the ground with local communities in terms of building resilience at different levels. However, a lot has been said, and I truly agree with that, as much as I also have learned a lot. For me, very strongly, in terms of the true value of food, we need to understand how much food plays a role in steering, consolidating, and sustaining resilience. But most importantly, we have to consider that the true value of food should be rooted in that value that helps food to be safe for humans, accessible, affordable to all who need it and when they need it, as well as does not come at the cost of environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, the health and the happiness and peaceful coexistence of the people who are involved in these value chains at different levels, and all the stakeholders who are involved, whether in production, whether in processing, whether in consuming, in ensuring that food is actually not just a human want, but a fundamental, inalienable human need that is actually supposed to be on the table of everyone in a more safer and affordable way, like I said. And of course, it is important, let me add critically, that all stakeholders at all levels need to play a critical role in ensuring that the true value of food is actually enjoyed by every human. That means food should not be a tool for war, and it should rather be a tool for peace. That means food should not be a channel for chemical warfare or chemical destruction of some people against some people. It should rather be a tool for promoting global harmony that actually, strongly, and consolidate the food systems as a human need that actually supports the sustainable global goals. It also means that food is not a tool for political poverty. Food should be a right for every human, and we should also make that food becomes a global family, consumable that everyone would love to, actually get on their table with the amount of, resources that they get, whether you come from a local community, whether you come from the skyscrapers of New York or the skyscrapers of Japan. We should see food as that common human, family property that we all should enjoy, so that it can add to the true happiness that we all need in the world to promote peace and to promote resilience. Especially climate resilience does not come from isolation. It doesn't come from an empty. It comes from people who are productive enough, and the productivity of these people should be determined by how much they enjoy doing what they're doing and accessing the foods that are available for them. Otherwise, I strongly also say that governments have a very strong role in playing in ensuring that the true value of food should be that true value that supports education, that supports peace, that supports good health, and that supports different constructive aspects of the economy and the social structures of society.
Right.
With that, we can so quickly move to achieving the global goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tabi. I think resilience is a theme we all want to as an outcome of our food systems. And let me end with the last comments on the panel with my good friend Lawrence Haddad, who is the executive director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition.
Thank you, Roy. So whenever I think of the true value of food, I think of, I'm a big science fiction fan. I think of The Matrix, this movie, The Matrix, from about 20 years ago. I'm a big science fiction fan. And whenever I think about the true value of food, I think of The Matrix. This is a movie, it was about 20 years ago. There have been multiple sequels. But the essential premise of the film is it's a dystopian future. And the lead character in the film has a choice to make between taking a red pill or a blue pill. Does any of you know this movie? Yes. Okay. So I'm not. Yeah, you're not scrunching your faces up saying, "What is he talking about?" So the blue pill. If you take the blue pill, you're essentially accepting blissful ignorance, but your body is being ruthlessly exploited physically. If you take the red pill, you see the horrible reality, but you can do something about it. You can fight it. And that feels very relevant to what we're doing here with the true value of food, because too many people are taking the blue pill and not enough people are taking the red pill. So the question is, why is that the case? And I used to think it was the science wasn't quite there. I think the science is there now. I'd like it to be a bit more consolidated, maybe, and to have fewer camps fighting it out, saying my true value food metric is better than your true value food metric, because that's not terribly helpful, really. I mean, science needs to build on each other, but not fight with each other, and certainly not fragment. There does need to be some consensus, but there does also need to be the methodology that allows different contexts, different countries, different regions to adapt it to their reality. But I think the bigger reason is that if I'm a decision maker, and I really like to hear from the decision makers in the room, if I'm a policy maker or I'm a procurement officer in a retail chain, or I'm a farmer, or I'm a game country director, I want to know, what is this you're trying to get me to use? How is it going to help me? What are the risks of doing it? What's the downsides of doing it? And who else is doing it? And how are they doing it? And I don't think we've been very good at socializing the examples. We've heard some examples. They're great, but it's the same examples we always hear. And when you dig deeply, some of them are pretty flimsy examples, actually. So we need more examples. More importantly, we need to socialize the ones we have really well. So that's really my contribution, Roy. I'm not an expert on this topic, but I'm a champion of operationalizing the true value. The most exciting thing I've heard is actually coming out of Rockefeller with the support you're giving to the, I think it's the state of New York in the US. Is that right? No. That's the state of New York in US, the work you're doing there. Some of the procurement.
Changing the procurement rules and processes.
The governments have a huge role to play here. Businesses have a role to play, but it's limited, I think. Governments make decisions about procurement of food. We heard from Omid about the Rwanda example. Governments can decide which foods to subsidize or tax. Governments can decide what crops to pump R&D into or not. These are all choices that should be being influenced by the true value of food metrics, but in other than a very few cases are not. So, final point, Roy. I began on science fiction. I end on science fiction. I was trying to think, before I came up with the Matrix analogy, I was trying to think of other analogies for what we're doing right now. One of them was, we don't believe in germs because we can't see them unless we have a microscope. Or we don't believe the earth is round because we can't see the curvature of the earth. But those are bad examples because people who believe that didn't know better, but we know better. So we don't want people in 50 years saying, those guys were so dumb. They were using currencies that they knew were going to get them into bad situations, and they still kept using them. So that's my plea to pick up on Owen's point. Why not? We need to cover loads and loads of examples of why not, and then loads and loads of examples of how to. Back to you.
Great. Thank you so much. That's a great way to kind of open it up to some questions and comments from the audience before we allow the honorable ministers to share their ideas. So if we have a roving microphone, that'd be great. But I'd love to. We have one comment over here, and then another comment over there. Question, and I will maybe ask some of the audience members to answer if it's a question.
Morning. My name is Fadel Jame. I used to be a deputy president at AGRA. I'm now running a company called Food System Transformation Solutions. Now, I have to make a few comments on this discussion. I really enjoyed it. And I don't know, Roy, you know me, I can talk for a long time, but I'll try to be short.
Okay, well, good. I'm going to hold you to that.
I remember, Roy, having a discussion with your team in Nairobi around food waste and spoilage. A big discussion that the Rockefeller drove that discussion. But what I remember in a meeting, somebody asking an expert, what is a waste? What is food waste? And one of your experts that came from a university somewhere in the US, I don't remember the name, said, my dad would say, waste is. So the point I'm trying to highlight is my dad would say, which means your dad could say something different. Coming back to the issue of food, the question I asked, what is food? What is true? Who defines the truth? And I think Thabo put it excellently. Basically, and I also took a red pill, Ada. And I think what we're struggling with, and we're jumping very quickly to solution to policy, etc. But we need to think what is at stake here. I think mentally we should be prepared to move away from a paradigm of economic convergence, where technology progress happen and then spread, to convergence economies, which means there is no blueprint. I really love what Thabo is saying, so that we can define food as something that people want, they need, that can be produced in their own terms, and that is consistent with what the environment can take. Obviously, this has to be co-created. I'm a Senegalese, I'm Mandinka. My food has to have kucha. None of you know what kucha is. So the implication, just to go very fast, is, and I like your point that not only you cannot get the tools if you cannot think it. What is the change? What is the successful, food accounting, to take your point to my friend Cheryl? We have to define it collectively. Once we know it, then the second question is, for it to happen, who needs to change? Now, because we don't have a lot of time, I will go along your line. I think there is huge opportunity of convergence of innovation, technical, institutional, and policy, but it will happen through dialogues. Several conversations happening at different levels, from the local to the global, so that people define what is food, how do you do it, etc. Obviously, they have implication of data, voice, being able to make sense of it. Technology will help us, then policy will matter. So I think we need to rethink. It's not the usual top-down, etc. It's a totally different, it's a governance revolution.
Great, governance revolution. Thank you so much, Fidel. I appreciate that. Yes, please introduce yourself and where you're from.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Dr. Edwin Bugwa from Concern Worldwide. I'm from Kenya. And I find the discussions very interesting. And I just wanted to maybe throw another lens to it. I know some of the speakers have mentioned a bit about the quality of food. So when you're looking at the true value of food, I think it's also important to look at the effects of having too much of the food or lack of the food. For example, from the parts of Kenya and the region of East Africa, we're having a very severe drought situation, meaning there is no food, meaning that death is occurring because of lack of food. So if you're talking about the true value of food, I think it's important to look at issues to do with malnutrition as a result of lack of food or lack of the correct kind of food, and so on and so forth, so that, we can look at the whole picture holistically. I think I might have to regurgitate the blue pill and take the red pill, and also throw in the issue of the health impacts of lack of quality and healthy food. And some of the facts that you are stating from McKinsey are highlighting the need to not just look at the value of food, but the value of quality, healthy, nutritious food. Thank you.
Great, thank you. This idea that it's not just quantity, it's quality and all the different dimensions of that food. Any other comments that people would like to make? Yes, over there. We have. Oh, okay, Agnes, then in the back, and then over here.
Thank you. Now I'm listening to this conversation and just wondering whether we really just need to step back and look at the word true value of food, right? From a perspective of when we have food on the table, is it possible to stop a moment and ask ourselves, what did it cost for this food to be on my table, right? Let's start with, we have food, and then let's look at what did it cost, right? Number one, if I look at it from what did it cost perspective, some of it is, of course, we are using environment to get food on the table, right? So that cost is definitely something we have to account for. I see Minister Jean getting excited, but Jean, we have to use environment to produce food, whether you like it or not. so even as I say that, I'm not saying that we don't use the environment. We just have to be conscious of how we use the environment and how we minimize impact. But then there's another thing. If the food on the table is part of harm to your body, right? Or is part of denying you the right amount of food. So the parallel that I see is when in some of these, in my previous life where I would actually go working in villages, when you see a kid eating this food and you say, okay, this kid is probably going to eat more and more and more of this because you can already, or has been eating more and more of this, and you can already see their hair is turning white, right? This kid is going to end up in hospital, right? And when they're in hospital there, the thing is we spend so much money treating those symptoms that the kid has got as a result of not eating right. So there's a cost there to the state of not getting the right food on the table to the kid. And when we talk about true value of food, one of what I would hope is that we actually get that cost, that money that is being spent in hospital, and turn it into value so that the kid can access the right food at home, right? So how do we ensure that we do not spend money trying to treat malnutrition? We actually spend money trying to ensure the right nutrition. The cost of eating the wrong, but there's also another thing. We eat the wrong food. We end up in hospital to treat the impact of the wrong food. And that is more frequent these days than even the malnutrition situation. Mm-hmm. Then you spend so much money dealing with cardiovascular diseases, pressure, diabetes, blah, blah, blah. That is the true cost of food. The money we spend to treat things we could have avoided if we had eaten the right food. Yeah. So there's a place here for government, basically what I'm trying to say. There's a place here for government and policymakers to set the tone on what is right in terms of what we put in our body and what is right in terms of how we expect to use the environment. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Agnes. We are running out of time. So if we could have two last short comments, and then I will turn it over to our honorable ministers to close us out.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Salamat Garba from Wofan. I think the aspect of food fortification has been silent, and I know there are some organizations and partners that are promoting fortification of food now so that the right nutrient can get down to the rural level, let's say the flour and the oil. So what is our stake on this aspect of food fortification, and what will be the economic impact of that? Thank you.
All right, that's a big subject. We can take that offline, but it's a very important area. And last comment.
Thanks, Corinna Hawkes from the Centre for Food Policy. I wanted to pick up on the point about what's at stake that was made by the gentleman over there, and also the point that was made about maximisation. I think that if the trade-offs are going to be managed in the system between these various goals, it's hard to see how individual goals can be maximized. And indeed, if you think about system dynamics, it involves optimizing, not maximizing. Yeah. So that means that there will be trade-offs, and there will be people who lose from the fact that maximization perhaps becomes more difficult. So that implies a real difficult challenge of change leadership, of how to enable people to adapt, but also that the incentives are all wrong. At the moment, the incentives are to maximize production. So changing those incentives and using policy frameworks to do that will be necessary. And it all seems very, very tough.
Yes.
Very, very hard and very transformative, which is what makes it so exciting. But it does strike me that there will be a need for investment to de-risk the examples that Lawrence is rightly calling for, something that will help people make those changes and de-risk that as it goes along. So yeah, all credit to the effort, but it will be challenging. Just one final point. I would like to see gender brought more into these discussions. We talk about the true cost on these goals, but I think given that the negative costs of food are often borne by women, that we should bring the gender element much more into these discussions.
Great, thank you. Well, it's the challenge of taking the red pill is that you have to face some very painful realities and also difficult trade-offs. Let us close the session with some comments from policymakers who actually make a lot of these decisions that have to do these trade-offs on a continual basis. So if I could turn to Mr. Maganga Musulu, from the Gabon, former Minister of Agriculture, Livestock and Fisheries. All three of those often take our trade-offs in themselves. So please, BND.
Okay, thank you, Roy. First of all, I'd like to thank Agnes who invited me here in Kigali. And I must say that when I was chosen to be a panelist in this topic of true value of food, I was upset. I said to myself, why am I chosen to go in this understandable subject? But as a former Minister of Agriculture, I spent 4 years as a Minister of Agriculture, 2 years as Minister of SMEs in Gabon. I was the national convener of the National Dialogue. And we went through so many discussions. The dialogue was intense in Gabon. And let's go back to the ground. Agnes said something about health. Let's remember two very strong episodes that could help us understand what is the true value of food. We are in Africa. We are used to mitigating the lack of protein, animal protein produced by what wildlife provides us.
and we are used to eat bushmeat. But what is the cost of this bushmeat we eat in the nature? One day we found out that there is a disease that is called Ebola. What was the cost of Ebola? Ebola was it was a big cost, but very recently in Asia, the same habits of eating bushmeat then happened one day in Wuhan. A guy who decided, or a guy or a woman who decided to have a meal of pangolin and then start the spread of COVID. Roy, we talked about it previously. It was certainly the most expensive meal ever. Lives and trillions of dollars all across the world. This is what we have to take to keep in mind when we talk about true value of food. The second example, you have imports in Africa. We have a producer, a local producer from Rwanda. You have chicken who comes to Africa, every country, chicken, very cheap, not expensive at all, and more competitive than what is produced locally, without any customs. It's custom free. Very easy to access. Importers are very powerful in Africa, but in the same time, it's a very strong competition for the local producers. And livestock and agriculture is, without any doubt, the only sector that can create employment in a continent where you have most of the population that are around 70% young people. A third of these people are unemployed, jobless. The second third are underemployed or in the informal sector, so we no healthcare, no access to social coverage. So you know that you have to take into account what is the cost, the real cost of our imports. Is it the price we pay to fulfill the family basket, or is it more because there are so many things that are to be taken into account? As a minister, we put in place the famous platform of One Health with animal health, environment, and human. But I think we should add in this One Health approach maybe stability, because young people unemployed become unmanageable. They try to find their happiness somewhere, or to feed themselves with not being compliant. Let's say so. You have economy, jobs that are not created, and if you take this issue of importing cereals from Ukraine or from Russia, or fertilizers from Ukraine or from Russia, the question is, do we have, as policymakers or as decision makers, to rush to find a way to import again these products from these countries, or do we have to put in place a capacity of creating jobs in the continent? I'm talking about Africa. Yeah. In the continent, this is what this methodology brings as a very a very important tool because there is a dialogue between all the policymakers, all the decision makers. But if you have a methodology that can be put in the that can be implemented or accepted in the context of every country or in the context of the continent, I think we really, really have a good way to improve and to make our food systems more resilient.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. That's a great way to summarize that. And I love those two examples, the most expensive meal ever in human history. We really didn't understand that. To close it out, I'd like to ask the Honorable Minister, Majaba Maria, to share her quick comments.
Thank you very much, moderator. Dear panelists and dear audience, let me start by conveying my condolences to His Majesty the King and the Queen Consort and the entire royal family on the passing of Her Majesty the Queen. May her soul rest in peace. So regarding the discussions we had on food system, I was telling to my colleague here, we have to say the right food system, because we have to have the right food on our table. And we have to produce that right food right way. Sustainability is the key. So as a Minister of Environment, I want to just show how climate change is affecting the food system and how the production of the food system is also impacting the climate change. And you all are aware that the risk climate stressors are the most affected by climate change impact. Climate change effects. So how climate change affects food systems? Yes, Dr. Karibata said that we have to use environment to produce food, but we have to use environment sustainable in a sustainable way. When we are talking about climate change affecting the food system, you all are aware that climate changes are affecting food system in 4 pillars: availability, accessibility, utilization, and stability. The increase of temperature and change in rainfall patterns affect negatively the production of crops and livestock and even aquaculture. So even the extreme weather affects the food system we are talking about. And when Africa decided to have Africa Center of Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain, which is based in Rwanda, it was to protect our farmers, because we are losing a lot between the farm and the market. Africa is losing 40% of its productivity. So we have to change the way we do business. For example, when Rwanda decided to ban single-use plastics, when Rwanda decided to ban plastic carry bags, it was to protect the environment, but at the same time, to protect the agriculture activities. Because, when the environment is full of plastic carry bags, plastic waste, there is no water filtration, water cannot penetrate, so there is only floods. When there is rain, you see only floods. And of course, there was resistance, but sometimes we have to take strong measures to protect our people. So Rwanda is increasingly experiencing more extreme weather, but we are the least polluters. But we are paying the price of the most polluting partners. But we will not wait for the reactions of the polluters. We have to be innovative, how to come out of that situation. So how then our food system contributes to climate change? Or how better can we do to make sure that the effect of food system is less than what we have now? As you all know, globally, 21 to 37% of total greenhouse gases emissions are coming from agriculture activities.
Yeah.
And we have to use the environment, as Dr. Kariwata was saying, Agnes, but we can use environment sustainably. As people who are in agriculture, in food system, how can really Africa, as big as it is, rely on wheat from Ukraine, on wheat from Russia? Now it is an opportunity for African continent to produce its own food.
Yes.
And export to those affected part of the world. It's time now. We have to use the environment we are having and even promote vertical agriculture, to use less land and to exploit the height. It is possible, and it will not only protect our environment, it will also improve the way we do business. So Rwanda's strategic approach to sustainable and resilient food system. Firstly, Rwanda is taking steps to enhance agroecology, crop variety development, and promoting climate resilient cultivars and animal breeds, local and export markets. I heard yesterday you visited the Nyandungu Park. This Nyandungu Park was a wetland, a destroyed wetland, occupied by human activities. And we removed all human activities to restore the wetland. It's not that we love wetland than our human, but we wanted to protect the environment, but protecting our people and placing them on less risky environment.
It's a brilliant endeavor. So we just have to, I've been told I need to end shortly.
Yes. And they got now resilient buildings, and the environment also is protected. To end the story, to make the story short, agriculture and food systems are among our basic needs and are key to global climate change responses. So we have to combine supply side actions such as efficient production, efficient transport, and processing with demand side interventions such as modification of food choices, so that in our production, we are talking about food waste. Why should Africa have food waste when we are talking about malnourished population? So let us go into no waste is wasted. Even the food waste can be transformed into fertilizers, into energy, so that we will get alternative source of energy instead of cutting trees for biomass use. So let us go for no waste is wasted, and we will have sustainable agriculture. Thank you.
That is great. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister.